And welcome everyone. It looks like we've got a big crowd tonight. Uh, so today, this Dharma talk in some sense marks the beginning of our yearly Kyoche period. Formally, Kyoche started at the Providence Zen Center, the head temple of the Americas, on Saturday. I guess it was Saturday the 8th, and it will go through until I believe it's Friday, April 7th, is my guess. It's the traditional, in the Buddhist world, the traditional 90-day meditation retreat. For those of you who may not know this, the rhythm of life for the Sangha in the Buddhist time, where they would spend 3 months, the monastics would gather, they'd do an intensive retreat period for 3 months, and then at the end of that 3 months, they would disperse and go out. The word's Kyoche, it's a Korean term, and it literally translates tight Dharma. And the end of Kyoche, we call Heije, and it stands for loose Dharma. So there's a rhythm in a practice life of tightness and looseness. And remember, of course, the Buddha way is the middle way. The middle way isn't a gray mush. It actually holds all things. There's a time for more intensive, tight Dharma. There's a time for lucid Dharma. Both of those aspects are our teacher. The life that we create around our practice schedule is in support of our waking up. Remember, Buddha began his practice because he realized he was trapped. In my way of telling the story, he was trapped in a prison, and the prison had to do with his beliefs and ideas. For the Buddha's life, it was the ideas and beliefs that his father was very focused on, I guess the word would be inculcating him with. And when Buddha finally did, when he did realize that, when he realized that he was trapped in a conceptual framework and he didn't know who he was, he then left the palace, and he took off and he started to do a strong, more tight practice. Just give me 1 second here. Okay. So the practice period of tight Dharma is a representation of how we come back to our formal practice and we re-inspire and reaffirm and redo, if you will, our formal practice. So it means we've just come out of a loose Dharma period. And if you think about it, at least in our American calendar and the way we hold these schedules, we've just been beginning with Thanksgiving. We've been through the Christmas holidays. People are gathering. Of course, we see the results in our virus numbers, but leaving that aside for a little while at least, we both teach and learn as we are interacting with our community. In so many ways, our life is our practice. So during the loose Dharma time, we may not practice as intensely, but we're always practicing. If we can keep our great question, what am I? Then we're always practicing. But again, sometimes we need the looseness in order to push our boundaries a little bit, perhaps, find ourselves in situations that we don't expect. But then there's retreat time where everything is routinized and scheduled. And as we often say in Zen, when it comes to our retreat practice, the schedule is our teacher. We follow our schedule. And by following the schedule, we're learning things that we don't expect. We're open to things we don't expect. We're allowing the schedule and the aspects that we're doing within the schedule to shake the bars of our conceptual prison. Not conceptually, actually. If we really can connect again with how much we don't know, how many assumptions we make. Remember back in June, at least here in the United States, when we thought, oh, we're out of this. We're vaccinated now. We're free. And then here we are again in the second wave, at least post that moment. So I like to think about it right now is if you don't believe in not knowing, then you're not paying attention. Because everything about our lives is totally upside down right now. So in this Kyoche time, in this practice period, allow that upside downness to open you. The conventional way of meeting not knowing is to shut down, batten down the hatches, come to some good assumptions and beliefs and use them to protect ourselves from the unknown, from the unpredictability. But we're practitioners. We take this not knowing as our opening, as our gateway of liberation. So 3 months is a long time. What I have found over the years is that it's often easy to begin a 3-month period with a lot of energy and intensity. But as time goes by, that energy and intensity wanes. So many of us in the Empty Gate Sangha are doing something called Heart Kyoche. Kyoche is, again, the practice period that is formally being done, at least in North America, at the Providence Zen Center. In Europe, it's being done in Spain, outside of Barcelona, in Prague, in Warsaw. In Korea, they start earlier. They finish in February, but they're already 2 months into their 90-day retreat. And I believe in Hong Kong, they follow a very similar schedule. So all around the world, not just in the Quantum School of Zen, but many, many practice centers, not just Zen, all sorts of different Buddhism. People are gathering in the traditional rainy season, whether it's rainy or not, and they're tightening their Dharma, they're recommitting, and they're actually doing the hard practice. So you all know, obviously you're here tonight, you know our schedule here at Empty Gate. You may know that we have our first of the Kyoche time retreats starting this Friday. We've got a 3-day meditation retreat starting with Zen Master Bon Soeng, Bobby Rhodes. And then at the end of February, we do our yearly 8-day retreat that begins on the last Friday in February. And then we close together early April. But often it's helpful to think of, for me at least, to think of this time from now and through the 8-day retreat as an intense practice period. So I'm really just trying to encourage you all to recommit, to find the fruits of your formal practice, to make the effort into your formal practice. Of course, in the before times, we would meet at Zen centers together and we would have that ability to support each other in person. Now I'm looking out at this screen, there's people from all over the world here. Each one of us can support each other by gathering even online to practice together, to encourage and be good Dharma friends. So I want to just read a poem. I was looking, I often will look at these poems for something that connects to the theme of my Dharma talk. And tonight I found a Kyoche poem by Zen Master Mangang. Zen Master Mangang is a very, very important figure in the Quantum School of Zen. He was Zen Master Sun San's grand teacher and a very strong, powerful practitioner. And this poem, just to give you a warning, it's a don't know poem. Don't try to make sense of it. Just take it in. So Kyoche Poem by Zen Master Mangang. And you could imagine he wrote this, I'm going to make up a number, but think of sometime in the late 1920s, maybe the early 1930s. It's a time that Korea is colonized by the Japanese. The Japanese Buddhists are attempting very strongly and with a lot of force, trying to change Korean Buddhism to mirror what they do in Japan. And during the occupation, they had the power of a gun behind them. And Mangang was known as one of the very important teachers in Korea who were resisting the Japanese. And just to give you the time frame, the Japanese first came into Korea, at least at this point in history, in the early 1900s. So most of Mangang's life and the times, certainly the times he was teaching, he was living under occupation. So imagine for a second what it would be like for any one of us. Maybe some of us already feel like we are living under occupation. But it adds a whole level of stress and a whole level of needing to work with one's conceptual framework, especially if you're a Zen master. So Kyoche Poem by Zen Master Mangang. When Kyoche begins, the stone girl has a dream. When Kyoche ends, the wooden man sings a song. Dream and song, put it all down. Look at the moon, bright as dark ink. So you can go through those 4 lines, don't know, don't know, don't know, don't know. What does that mean? Put everything down. The 3rd line always clears the deck. So he's telling you, don't get attached to the dream, don't get attached to the song. And if you're like me, you probably got attached to the stone girl and the wooden man. What is that? All of that helps to serve to see how our minds get stuck. And in Zen, we want to stuck our minds because then we have a chance to open. So when he says, dream and song, put it all down, that's as good as just shouting, "Ha!" And then he says, look at the moon, bright as dark ink. At first, that sounds like a contradiction, but maybe we need to do some investigating on dark ink. Assumptions, assumptions, assumptions. So please, again, I'm merely trying to encourage you, take the opportunity of this time period. Use your practice, commit, and really do it. There have been many years where I've used this Kyoche period as a time to help me tighten my life. Some years it's been working with my diet. Some years it's been working with habits that have gotten out of hand. The Kyoche is a time to look at ourselves. What am I? Often when we do that, we notice the ways we get in our own way. Pay attention and take it seriously. So I want to switch a little bit. I've got two more things I want to talk about. I've been watching the almost 7-hour documentary about the Beatles. And I don't know how many of you have seen any of it, but it's actually been quite fascinating to me on many levels. But I want to talk about one specific point. One of the things, it goes on and on and on and on, and in a very mundane kind of way. You're basically watching these four men who I have such a big idea about. I mean, I was 11 when the Beatles came to America. And the very next day, I was George Harrison. I was standing there in school with a broom, and somehow I was George Harrison, which always surprises me, since in my mind, he's the spiritual one, and his music actually speaks to me more than any of them. How I would have known that as an 11-year-old? Maybe it was just serendipitous. Maybe I didn't know anything. Maybe I knew more than I thought I did. We don't know. I certainly don't know. Anyway, the main point I want to make here is that in watching them, they come across, to me at least, as quite ordinary. There's not a fancy spread for a superstar to eat all the food they want. They ask people, could you bring me some toast and maybe a little tea? And there's an ordinary quality about them that when I watch it on the screen and I remember all the shouting, all the craziness, all the hoopla that surrounded them as performers. And then to just see, they're just human beings. They're no different than you and I. They happen to be amazingly great at their art. And that also comes through. One of the beautiful things, just as an aside, although maybe it's not an aside, the beautiful things that I see in the video is almost out of nowhere comes a note, and out of that note comes a chord, and out of the rhythm of that chord comes this iconic song that I know every word to and every movement of the music. And it grew out of emptiness. It didn't exist. And then a couple of guitar strings get hit, and suddenly appears this amazing piece of art. And that's a reminder to me. In the Taoist view, everything arises out of absence, comes into presence, and returns to absence. That's the way of the universe. And watching art being made, I could see it. From nothing, something came. And then what happens is that something becomes a thing. And I could see all the ideas and beliefs and opinions that grow up around what is actually just a piece of art. Not just, but it's not my commentary. It's the music itself. And it comes from nowhere and returns to nowhere. So all of the screaming, the yelling, the frantic quality that we human beings make around something seems so silly. All the hoopla we make, all the ways we lose ourselves into a fantasy of things. So now a personal story that'll connect, but I think there's enough newer people or people who may not know this story that I want I want to give you a brief story of what we call the story of Juan Hyo. Juan Hyo lived in about the 800s in Korea. Very famous monk in Korea at this point. But this story takes place when he was a new monk. He was practicing, he was learning, and he decided he needed to go to China because China really was the place that Zen was at its fullest flowering at that time, and he wanted to go right to the source. So he started traveling, which in those days entailed walking, and he was walking and walking and walking. Now here the story, there are different versions of the story. Our official Kwan story, he ends up at this oasis, which would imply that somewhere in northern Korea there was a desert that he was walking through. I've read other versions of this story where it's nighttime and he goes to rest and get shelter in a cave. So he goes to sleep. And then in the middle of the night, and he wakes up and he's very thirsty. And he reaches around, he can't see anything. And he reaches around him and he finds this cup. And he drinks the water from the cup. He's refreshed. And he goes back to sleep. He wakes up the next morning and he starts to look around the cave where he is. And he sees that what he thought was a cup was actually the skull of a very recently killed animal. And what he thought was water was a combination of probably some water, some blood, some meat from the animal, and a whole slew of maggots that are on the surface of the liquid. And he takes one look at that and he vomits, just purges completely. And that was his awakening experience, his first awakening experience. And he realized, last night I was thirsty and this liquid quenched my thirst, so I was happy. Today I look at that skull and it so disgusts me that I vomited. Everything is made by mind alone. Make sense? Nothing changed except for his viewpoint. So at Christmas time, one of the younger members of our family asked us all to think of a life lesson that we learned and to write the story of that lesson and then to write a little bit about the lesson. And she was going to collect all the stories, and we haven't seen them yet, but I assume we'll receive them by email. So it was an interesting process for me because I started to tell one story, and that led me to another story, which I then wrote about, and I understood in a new way. So this is a little bit of a silly story about me, but I was about 21 years old, probably 21 and a half to be exact, and I had graduated college and I wanted to get away. I was a little bit at that time in my life like the Buddha, who had just realized that everything he believed was just beliefs and that life was different than he thought. So I left home, and I ended up at a small Zen community in, for those of you who know California, in Mendocino. And I moved in, I got out of college by the middle of December, and I had moved into Big River Farm, which was the name of it, by March, the middle of March or the end of March. So not much time had elapsed, but a whole world had changed for me. And just a tiny little bit of my background. I grew up in a family with a father, a mother, a grandfather, and 3 sons. And my father did not eat vegetables. We ate salad, and he would probably eat corn and potatoes, but that was it. And as one of his sons, that's what I did. My story was I didn't like vegetables, and I didn't eat them. I ate salad, but that was it. So I moved to the Zen community, and it wasn't fully vegetarian, so I didn't have a big problem at that point. And then one day, for some reason, probably very soon after I had moved there, a week or two is my guess, but I don't remember, I ate a piece of broccoli. And that broccoli blew my mind. I liked it. And it so totally didn't connect with my story that I didn't even know what to do. My wife Sheridan, who happens to be on the call here, she reminds me that I walked around the community saying, broccoli is delicious. I can't believe it. And I can only imagine how stupid I looked. And I probably was about 10 years younger than most everybody else at the community anyway. I just must have looked like a silly young boy. So the next day, somebody made 5-bean chili. I don't think I had ever had a bean in my life. And I ate the bean chili and I liked it. And I became a vegetarian that day. Just like Juan Hyo. Just like Juan Hyo. I had all sorts of ideas. I believed they were true. One thing happened, and it changed my life. And in some ways, it was one of my early awakenings. The lesson that I realized I got from that time was that just because I believe something doesn't make it true. And that my beliefs are created by circumstances. They're not fixed as truth. Each one of us on this Zoom meeting tonight is a different human being. Each one of us has our own way. That's natural, as it should be. But what is your way? And where does it come from? And I suppose what I really want to ask, and I think I'm going to close here, you may or may not choose to pick up on this, but I'm curious, what is your Juan Hyo story? What's the experience or the experiences in your life that is not just a conceptual idea, but you tasted it, you had the experience, and you realized that everything you believed, or at least that portion of what you believed, wasn't true. And I guess I would like to encourage each one of us to find that story, if it exists for you, and remember it, and use it as a touchstone. I'm sure whether you can think of one particular thing or not, every single one of us has had some experience that has blown our minds and has made us realize that we believed something not because it was true, but just because somebody told us and we didn't really investigate for ourselves. And I suppose that brings us back to the beginning of Kyoche. Because the true deep meaning of Kyoche is that investigation. What am I? What is this? Just now, what is it? And then be open enough to have your mind blown. In an ideal world, once a day, you recognize the mistaken assumptions that you carry. And generally, people don't like to have their cover blown. They don't like to have their assumptions made transparent. But again, you're here because in one sense or another, you're a Zen practitioner or a Buddhist practitioner. Something about that great question is gnawing at you. What is it really? What am I really? Use this tight Dharma to let your mind be blown and in the process of a blown mind, to let your heart open. Settle deeply into your lower abdomen, into your center, and hold this great question: what am I? Let go of your idea of good and bad. Sometimes you'll think you're a great person. Sometimes you'll think you're a piece of shit. Either way, it's just thinking. You're neither. But what are you?